Project Command. Stand by power transfer. Time is X minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having all of us here. I want to ask you a little bit about a couple of different roles that you've had in your career. And I want to start with your current role.
I'm the manager of the Mission Integration and Operations Office in the Space Station program. And we do the flight planning, the mission priority management and integration. We manage all the consumables for the space station, including like food and crew provisions. And we also manage all the cargo flights that go to and from the space station, the contents of those flights. There's other things as well that we manage, but those are really the big pieces. So a lot of what we do is really about bringing all the pieces together to make sure that the mission can continue. So flight planning is a really good example. That's basically who gets to launch when, who's using which port for docking vehicles or berthing vehicles, who's attaching to the station when, what are they bringing, and what priorities are we going to be trying to manage in the time frame that those vehicles are there. It's a lot of piece parts, a lot of information that sort of funnels in to where we are. I've heard us described as the nozzle on the end of the hose. So the whole station program is putting all this data, all this effort in, and we're trying to aim it to a particular spot in the mission and make sure that it works. So my role, a lot of what I do now is making sure that we have a good team. So it's really the team management, but then it's also setting the vision for the office and making sure that we're all sort of going in the same direction on the work that we're doing.
I want to ask you a little bit about this space and about this room.
Sure. We are in the auditorium in Building 30, which is the building that includes Mission Control. And this is the gathering place, kind of traditional gathering place for the Flight Operations Directorate, which used to also be known as the Mission Operations Directorate, in big times of crisis, especially when we had to really come together and agree on the path forward and that kind of thing. The famous first time that this was used was Gene Kranz brought everybody in here after the Apollo 1 fire, when we lost that crew on the pad during a test. And this is the place where he gave what we call the tough and competent speech. He told everybody, when you get back to your office, you're going to go to your chalkboard at the time and write on it, tough and competent. You're going to put a big box around it. That will never be erased. Our job is to be tough and competent, to make the tough decisions and stick to our guns and make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep the crew safe.
Morning after the fire, Gene Kranz speaks to the team.
I don't know what the Thompson Committee will find as the cause of this accident, but I know what I find. We were the cause. Now, from this day forward, Mission Control will be known by two words: tough and competent.
So I want to take you now to the flight director role. It strikes me that is a job where you are leading, but under a spotlight.
Sure.
Everybody's watching. It's in real time. Yep. And you guys do a lot of practice and a lot of preparation, but even with all of that, there have to be times when unexpected things happen, when difficult things happen. What leadership skills do you think are particularly important to leading in those kinds of emerging moments?
So I'm going to talk a little abstractly for a minute because the concept sounds a little weird to begin with, but you need to not be so tied to a decision or a course of action that you can't rethink what the decision that you just made. So in other words, you're personally invested in the success of whatever it is you're doing, but you're not so invested in it that you're going to, for lack of a better term, die on this hill. Like this, you have to be able to rethink a decision that you just made. Which means you have to be open to new data coming in as it comes in. When you're in real time and something unexpected happens, you have to kind of acknowledge the reality of that thing, whatever it is, even if it is absolutely 100% not what you wanted to have happen. There's nothing you can do about that. This is what it is, kind of thing. And there are lots of different ways that can manifest, even, aside from in mission control in real time in space. But even something as simple as I was planning to do this kind of a spacewalk, and now we had a failure, and now I'm doing this kind of a spacewalk, and I have to figure out how do I get from over here to over here. That sounds, when it's not immediately in real time, like it's a spacewalk that's next week, it sounds really easy and doable. It's really complicated. If you've been marching in one direction, to shift gears and really go in a different direction can be really tough. Even if it's several months out, it may be really difficult to turn that ship, kind of thing. But you have to be open to the data and sort of recognize when you need to start the turn. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm curious as to sort of what have you brought from your experience as a flight director to your current job as a manager?
The training foundation that I got as a flight director, flight directors are part of the training team for flight controllers. So one of the big responsibilities for flight directors is keeping an eye on people as they are becoming flight controllers, because it's our responsibility to do the evaluation to determine when they're ready to actually join the mission in that role. And we do that by usually either in a simulation or in real time sitting with them for a shift. Basically, and watching how they're doing, and then deciding, do they have everything they need? Do they have all the skills they need? Or do they need a little bit more development in a particular area before they're really ready to support the mission in real time? And part of that process is being able to give them candid, honest, and helpful feedback. Even if somebody passes, there are going to be areas that they still need to work on and grow in as they go. So even the best evaluation that you give, you're giving them some notes on, here's an area where you can focus and grow a little bit more, and some things that you can try to get there. And I think one of the strengths of that whole process is it's so methodical and deliberate. And it's formulated to be helpful, because we want the flight controllers to succeed, but it's also formulated to be candid and to be upfront where there are shortcomings or areas that they really need to work on to develop strengths.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the flight director training? Because I found that very interesting, the very experiential kind of approach.
So we do most of our training by simulation. So we have we'll take over a room in mission control as our simulation front room, flight control room, or FICR. And then we have a whole nother building on the other side of campus where we have our simulators running, and a training team who are trying to trip us up, and they're trying to throw as many monkey wrenches at us as they can. And it's a pretty stressful environment. So we're really, in that environment, a lot of what we're trying to do, especially with the flight control team, is see, how are you reacting to it? Like, not only do you have to solve this problem, but then you have to continue after solving the problem. You don't just get to fall on the floor and breathe a sigh of relief. Like, the operations are going to continue. And what are you going to do the next time? And then the next time? And if this other thing comes in from the side and complicates it further, how do you handle that? And so we're stretching people as they get more experience. So like, there are lots of different levels of simulation training that you go through. The sort of entry, when somebody is a brand new trainee and they're coming in, it can be pretty basic. It's not necessarily very integrated, but it grows in complexity as you go.
And there's a more experienced flight director with you, right?
So as you're doing the flight director training, you're sitting with, you start out watching a more experienced flight director, and then you start taking over. And for a while, you have somebody sitting with you and making sure you're going in the right direction, but really just watching to give you feedback. So I'll tell you a funny story about that. My very first, we called them the hot seat sims. So you're sitting in the hot seat and you've got a flight director sitting back next to you watching. My very first one of those, I got through the sim. I was very nervous going into it, but I got through the sim and everything was still flying. So I was pretty proud of myself. And I turned to my mentor to get his feedback. He's sitting like this and he goes, "That was horrible. You didn't make a single decision all shift." And I stopped and I thought about it, and he was completely right. Like, basically people would bring me a recommendation and I would say, "Great." And that was, I really wasn't putting scrutiny on anything or adding any value to the decision space, or even really accounting for the risks that we were encountering along the way. And it totally flipped the way that I was thinking about the job, just hearing that. And it took me until hot seat sim. Like, at that point I'd been selected, which I thought was pretty good. And I, watched people doing sims, but it really took doing it for me to spot the difference. I think it's really important to actually do leadership in order to get feedback on leadership and get training on leadership. But really doing it is the only way that you're really going to get meaningful feedback about your own style, and your own shortcomings and where you can do better.
Part of your role as leader in doing that knitting together of everyone is helping them understand the context.
Right.
What do you mean by that?
It's really, I think the analogy that any leader can use is setting the vision, setting the tone, making sure that everybody knows what it is we're trying to achieve. So keeping the big picture in mind, but also the concrete objective that you're trying to make.
So you mentioned two things. One was setting the tone for the team. What does that look like? How do you do that?
We had one flight that was really challenging during assembly when we lost all three of our central computers on the U.S. segment, basically simultaneously. And we were trying like crazy to figure out how we could get commands to the vehicle and get them recovered. And I was a flight controller at the time. And I remember being on shift with the flight director was Bob Castle. And he kept a steady tone for the team in the way that he spoke, in the way that he interacted with team members, and in the way that he set the pace for the team to be methodical about what we were doing, think about the consequences of each of the actions that we were going to take, and then taking the action to see if we could actually recover. And we were successful in recovering it. But it's always stuck in my head, the way he really managed the tone to keep us from basically panicking, right? Or going into too much triage mode, when really what we needed to do was be methodical, be logical, think about the consequences of each of the actions that we needed to try to take, and then figure out how to take them.
The other really intense time that I remember was after we lost Columbia.
Today, when this happened over central Texas, a catastrophe in the sky. A lot of people were forced outdoors by the sound. They watched this sight play out. At first, one sizable chunk of wreckage, and then it fell apart.
Leroy Kane, who was the flight director on console during that entry shift, actually spoke to the flight control community in here. He actually did it a couple of times because the team by that time was so big, we couldn't all fit in the room all at once. And so he stood up here and talked about what was going through his mind during that shift as they were realizing they had lost the crew, and as the work started to recover the remains of Columbia and kind of put the pieces together. And it was really intense. And, he was very emotional, expressing a lot of the things that he was feeling and thinking. And it was really hugely important for the team to understand where he was coming from.
Why was it so important for you, anyway, to hear him express what he was going through?
As we're watching leaders, as we're growing up in an organization or in a career, you don't think about how they're reacting to the stuff that they're going through. You're really looking to them to model what you want to be able to to do, but it doesn't always occur to us that like maybe they're struggling with it or they're feeling emotional about it or something like that. And so being able to actually have that conversation and hear directly from him what the impact of those events were on him as he was going through it was really huge. It was a really important event, I think, for the team as a whole.